Wednesday on Capitol Hill, lawmakers will look for answers about the massive alleged fraud in Minnesota. Independent journalist Nick Shirley is one of the witnesses set to testify. He put together that viral video of a Somali daycare center that has brought the scandal to national attention. Let's bring in Roger Severino, the Vice President of Economy and Domestic Policy for the Heritage Foundation. Give us a sense, Roger, of just how bad or how big this Minnesota fraud case is.
Well, Nick Shirley has done the country a huge service by exposing that perhaps these millions of dollars going to Minnesota through Governor Walz perhaps was being used to fund massive fraud. Where are those kids? And the scale is rather astounding because this is not the first time Minneapolis has had this problem. This has been a recurring theme. There was a criminal gang that was using massive Medicaid and welfare fraud, and this was a known factor. The states receive federal funds for welfare programs. They have to spend the money responsibly. And the first casualty of the scandal may have been Governor Walz himself, who is no longer running because this scandal, I think, has gotten to such a large proportion. How deep does it go? Well, there's only one way to find out. We need to audit all of these programs immediately, and I'm sure they will uncover millions more of this sort of fraud.
We have a sort of a cheat sheet on what the money was supposed to do, and we can put that on the screen for our viewers. What the funds were meant for: things like feeding children, helping recovering addicts find a place to live, helping disabled adults live independently, one-on-one therapy for autistic children. Now, nobody would fault those goals, but the funds allegedly went to wire transfers to China and East Africa, a villa in the Maldive Islands, first-class plane tickets, luxury vehicles, lakefront property in Minnesota, designer jewelry, and crypto investments. Pretty appalling that the taxpayers of Minnesota were hit up for projects like those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people should be outraged. There are real people that are hurting, that should be helped, that are poor and need some helping hands. But the abuse is just astounding. It's a double fault. Not only is it robbing money from the American taxpayer, it's also robbing money from people who are supposed to receive the benefit of these programs. And again, the rot goes all the way up to the top. We already have evidence that Frey actually petitioned to continue these programs going with his Department of Education. And how much did they know? When did they know it? Were they getting political benefits? Were they getting a solid block of votes because these groups were receiving this money in this particular area? All right, these questions have to be answered, and there has to be real oversight. Congress needs to demand that every state that receives any penny of federal funds are responsible for the fraud that happens under their watch. And if they don't fix it, their funds should be cut.
The congressman from Arizona, Andy Biggs, was on with us yesterday, and he's going to be part of that congressional investigation. Listen to what he has to say.
So we're going to bring in an investigator to give us the breadth of some of the fraud in Minnesota. So we know certain programs. This will go further. Then we'll have Nick Shirley tell us what he found. But we also will bring in someone who runs a legitimate beneficiary of these services, and she'll tell us about how services can't be fully paid for because so much money gets diverted to fraud.
That is the tragedy here. As I mentioned before, I mean, there are people who could use some help, who need some legitimate help from taxpayers, and all of that has been siphoned off, apparently, by a bunch of fraudsters.
Yeah, and HHS froze a lot of this money until we get these answers, right? The buck has to stop somewhere. We can't just completely open up the siphon for money to leave federal coffers and we don't know what happens to it. It's being spent on crypto scams. Who knows what it's going to? And it's very easy. You send somebody, just like the citizen journalist did, knock on the doors, right? And say, hey, we're here to audit the program. And you do that and you'll see this fraud dry up quickly. But there has not been the political will because people have benefited from this. All right. The worst part of the interpretation is this a way of being sort of a vote buying scheme that, hey, we'll look the other way if we'll get votes in these cities. That's what we got to end if that's actually what's going on.
And the explosive growth in some of those programs should have told somebody that there were problems. But, you know, whoever the auditors were asleep at the switch, it seems.
Well, this is a problem with our welfare state, right? You give them the money that's meant to help people in need, and you go through a federal program, then you block grants to the states, and there's bureaucrats up and down. It's not their money. right? It's the taxpayers' money. So they don't have the incentives aligned to actually find out where the money is going. And we spend so much on waste, fraud, and abuse in our welfare program. If we just simply got rid of that, we could fund so much of people who are really in need for job training programs, things to give them a hand up. But our welfare program is this corrupt machine where the politicians look the other way. They hope to get some votes at the end of it. And the people who really need it are the ones who are being hurt by all this fraud.
Yeah, and we could reduce the tremendous federal deficit as well if we could spend
Absolutely.
some money in the right places. Roger Severino from the Heritage Foundation. Roger, thank you.